The saddest habits are not the ones people notice. They are the ones that become invisible. Every Friday evening at exactly 6 o'clock, William Carter walked through the front doors of the same restaurant. The hostess no longer asked how many people would be joining him. She already knew the answer. 1. She would offer the same polite smile, pick up the same menu, and lead him to the same table near the tall window overlooking the street. And every Friday, William would do the same thing. He would sit down in the chair facing the entrance. Then he would glance briefly at the chair across from him before placing his folded coat neatly on the empty seat beside him. Outside, Chicago moved at its usual pace. Cars rolled through intersections. Couples hurried along sidewalks. Friends met for dinner after long work weeks. Seasons changed. Summers became winters. Winters became summers. Yet inside that restaurant, one thing never changed. The empty chair remained. William was one of the wealthiest men in America. His name appeared in business magazines. His companies employed thousands of people. He owned buildings, investments, and properties across the country. At 58 years old, he had achieved everything that ambitious young entrepreneurs dreamed about. Yet every Friday evening, none of those things seemed to matter. The waiters knew his order before he spoke. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, sparkling water with lemon. A second glass of water always sat on the opposite side of the table. Untouched, unmoved, unexplained. During the first few months, employees occasionally asked whether someone would be joining him. William would simply smile and say no. Eventually, they stopped asking. New employees arrived over the years. Old employees moved on. Managers changed. Menus changed. The restaurant underwent a complete renovation. Still, William remained. Every Friday, every week, every year, the empty chair became part of the furniture. Customers noticed it occasionally. Some assumed he was waiting for a late guest. Others guessed it was an unusual habit. Nobody paid much attention for long. People are surprisingly good at accepting mysteries when they see them often enough. 3 years passed that way. 156 Fridays. 156 dinners. 156 evenings spent across from an empty chair. On a cool October night, golden light reflected against the restaurant windows while a soft rain tapped gently against the glass. William arrived at 6 o'clock exactly as always. He took his seat, ordered his meal, adjusted the second glass of water by half an inch. Then he settled into silence. Around him, conversations filled the room. Laughter drifted from nearby tables. Silverware clinked softly against plates. Nobody noticed anything unusual. Nobody except one person. Near the service station stood a young waitress named Emma Parker, 24 years old. Quiet, observant, knew enough to notice details that everyone else had stopped seeing. As she carried a tray of coffee toward another table, her eyes drifted briefly across the dining room. They landed on William, then on the chair opposite him. Her pace slowed slightly. Most people looked at the billionaire. Emma looked at the empty seat. And for reasons she could not yet explain, she suddenly found herself wondering who was missing. Emma tried to focus on her work, but the question refused to leave her mind. Who was supposed to be sitting there? She delivered orders, refilled coffee cups, and greeted new customers. Yet her attention kept drifting back toward the table by the window. William sat exactly as he always did. At least that was what everyone said. The older servers spoke about him the way people talk about landmarks. Familiar, permanent, unchanging. Table 12 is Mr. Carter, one waitress had told her during training. He comes every Friday. Another had laughed and added, "You could set your watch by him." At the time, Emma had not thought much about it. Restaurants were full of regular customers. People liked routines. But now she was beginning to notice details others ignored. William was not simply eating dinner. He was following a ritual. When his meal arrived, he always thanked the server warmly. Before taking a bite, he glanced briefly toward the empty chair. The second glass of water remained untouched, but he never allowed it to be removed. Even more curious, he always ordered dessert for two. Not two different desserts. Two identical slices of cheesecake. Every single Friday. Emma noticed it when she carried a tray past his table. One slice sat in front of him. The other remained perfectly arranged across from him beside the untouched water glass. Nobody questioned it. Nobody seemed interested. 3 years was apparently long enough for a mystery to become ordinary. Later that evening, Emma found herself standing beside the coffee station with Martha, a server who had worked at the restaurant for almost a decade. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said quietly. Martha followed her gaze toward William's table. About him. Emma smiled. Is it that obvious? Martha chuckled. Everyone asks when they first start here. Emma lowered her voice. Why does he always leave that chair empty? Martha shrugged. Nobody knows. Nobody ever asked. Maybe once or twice years ago. Martha wiped a coffee mug with a towel. He never seemed interested in answering. Emma looked back toward the table. That does not bother you. Martha considered the question. It used to. She smiled faintly. Then life got busy. The answer lingered with Emma. Life got busy. Maybe that was why people stopped noticing things. Not because they did not care. Because attention was a luxury most people forgot how to give. As the evening continued, rain streaked the windows in silver lines. The restaurant grew louder. Families celebrated birthdays. Couples shared meals. Friends laughed over drinks. Yet William remained an island unto himself. Not lonely exactly, just separate. At one point he smiled at a passing child who waved at him. The gesture revealed something unexpected. Warmth. Kindness. The expression disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared, but Emma noticed. She was beginning to realize that the billionaire many people admired from a distance seemed strangely invisible inside a crowded room. Near closing time, William folded his napkin carefully and placed it beside his plate. Then he did something that made Emma stop walking entirely. He lifted the untouched second water glass and gently moved it closer to the empty chair, as though making room for someone who might arrive at any moment. For a brief second, sadness crossed his face. Then it was gone. The mask returned. The calm smile returned. The routine continued. But Emma could not shake the feeling that the empty chair was not empty at all. It was holding a story nobody had listened to for 3 years. The following Friday arrived beneath a sky the color of polished steel. A cold wind swept through downtown Chicago, carrying fallen leaves along the sidewalks like small golden waves. At exactly 6 o'clock, William Carter entered the restaurant. Nothing about his arrival differed from the previous 156 Fridays. The hostess greeted him by name. He thanked her. He walked to the table by the window. He sat down facing the entrance. And once again, the chair across from him remained empty. But this evening felt different. Not to William. To Emma. During the week, she had found herself thinking about him more often than she expected. Not because he was famous. Not because he was wealthy. The city was full of successful people. What stayed with her was the sadness she had glimpsed for a single second when he adjusted that untouched water glass. Most people spent their lives trying to hide pain. Somehow, for one brief moment, his head slipped through. Emma spent the first hour of her shift watching quietly from a distance. The routine unfolded exactly as before. William ordered the same meal. The same sparkling water with lemon. The same dessert for two. Yet now that she was paying attention, she noticed even more details. He always arrived alone, but he never behaved as though he expected to be alone. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the entrance. Not constantly, not obviously, just enough to suggest a habit that refused to disappear. As though part of him still expected someone to walk through the door. Around 7:30, Emma carried a basket of warm bread to his table. William looked up and smiled politely. Thank you. You are welcome, Mr. Carter. She placed the basket down carefully. Can I get you anything else? No, this is perfect. Normally the conversation would have ended there. Yet neither moved. For a moment, an unusual silence settled between them. Emma noticed that the second place setting had already been arranged. 2 glasses, 2 forks, 2 dessert spoons waiting beside folded napkins. William followed her gaze briefly before looking away. The movement lasted less than a second. Still, she caught it. As Emma walked back toward the service station, Martha appeared beside her carrying a tray. You are studying him again. Emma laughed softly. Am I that obvious? Very. Martha smiled. You know, eventually you stop wondering. Emma glanced across the room. Maybe that is the problem. Martha looked puzzled. What do you mean? Emma watched William through the crowd of customers. Everybody stopped wondering. The older waitress considered that answer for a moment before continuing toward another table. Later that evening, a local jazz pianist began playing near the restaurant bar. Soft piano notes floated through the dining room. Conversations quieted. Candlelight flickered across polished glass. William sat motionless for several seconds after hearing the first melody. Something changed in his expression. Not much, just enough for Emma to notice. Then came the moment that truly captured her attention. William reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small, folded photograph. He looked at it briefly before placing it beside the second water glass. Not in front of himself. In front of the empty chair. Emma could not see the image from where she stood, but she saw the care with which he handled it. The respect. The familiarity. The memory. Suddenly, the empty chair no longer felt mysterious. It felt important. And for the first time since she started working there, Emma became certain of one thing. William Carter was not waiting for someone who might arrive. He was holding a place for someone who never could. Over the next several weeks, Emma found herself assigned to William's section more often. It was not intentional. At least that was what the manager claimed. Yet every Friday evening, somehow her rotation seemed to place her near the table by the window. Neither of them mentioned it. The arrangement simply happened. Their conversations remained brief at first. Questions about the menu. Comments about the weather. Small observations that disappeared as quickly as they arrived. Yet beneath those ordinary exchanges, something else was forming. Familiarity. Not friendship yet. Just recognition. The kind that develops when two people repeatedly occupy the same space long enough to notice each other's silences. One Friday evening in early November, the restaurant was decorated for the approaching holiday season. Small white lights glowed along the walls. Soft music drifted through the dining room. Outside, the city sparkled beneath a cold, clear sky. William arrived as usual and took his seat. Emma approached with a menu even though she knew he would not need it. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." William smiled. "Good evening, Emma." She noticed something immediately. The photograph was already on the table. Usually he waited until later in the evening before removing it from his jacket. Tonight it rested beside the second glass before his meal had even arrived. "Long week?" she asked. William glanced at the photograph. "Something like that." Emma nodded. She understood more than he realized. Not the details. The feeling. Some weeks carried more memories than others. As dinner continued, the restaurant filled with customers. Laughter echoed from nearby tables. Families celebrated birthdays. Friends gathered after work. Through it all, William remained quietly composed. Yet Emma noticed that his eyes returned to the photograph more often than usual. Near 8 o'clock, she passed a small flower arrangement sitting and used near the hostess stand. It contained several white roses and sprigs of greenery left over from a private event. An idea appeared unexpectedly. Before she could reconsider it, Emma removed a single white rose from the arrangement. Then she walked toward William's table. He looked up as she approached. Without saying a word, Emma placed the flower gently beside the empty chair. The gesture lasted only a second, yet the effect was immediate. William froze. The smile faded from his face. His eyes settled on the rose, then on the empty seat, then back to the rose again. Around them, the restaurant continued moving normally. Nobody else seemed to notice. But Emma saw something shift behind his calm expression. Not anger, not discomfort, something deeper. Memory. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Emma suddenly wondered if she had made a mistake. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I just thought." Her voice trailed away. William continued staring at the flower. Then, very slowly, he smiled. It was not the polite smile customers receive. It was something gentler, more fragile. "You know," he said quietly, "she loved white roses." Emma felt her breath catch. It was the first time he had ever spoken about the empty chair as though another person existed within the story. Not a mystery, not a habit, a person. William reached forward and carefully adjusted the stem so it faced the chair correctly. His movements carried the same care someone might use when straightening a family photograph. "Thank you," he said. Emma looked at him for a moment, then at the chair, then at the photograph resting beside the untouched glass. The question she had carried for weeks suddenly felt closer than ever before. Not because she had found an answer, because for the first time, the door to that answer had opened just a little. The white rose remained on the table long after dessert arrived. William never moved it. In fact, he seemed strangely comforted by its presence. Emma noticed the difference immediately. For the first time since she had started observing him, the silence around his table felt less heavy. Not lighter exactly, just shared. As though the empty chair was no longer carrying its memory alone. The following Friday, winter arrived early. Snow drifted through the city in soft waves, coating rooftops and sidewalks beneath a blanket of white. Inside the restaurant, warmth and conversation filled the air. William arrived at 6 o'clock as always. Emma was waiting near the hostess stand. When she saw him enter, she noticed something unusual. He was carrying the white rose from the previous week. The flower had been pressed carefully between the pages of a small leather notebook. He removed it once he sat down and placed it beside the photograph and the second glass of water. The gesture was simple, yet it told Emma everything she needed to know. The flower had mattered. Throughout dinner, she found herself wondering about the woman connected to that chair. Who had she been? What kind of life had she shared with William? What kind of love leaves a place at the table untouched for 3 years? Near 7 o'clock, Emma approached with fresh, sparkling water. William thanked her as usual. She hesitated for a moment. Then another. The question she had carried for weeks stood quietly at the edge of her thoughts. Every instinct told her not to ask. Yet another part of her felt that some stories waited not for answers, but for someone willing to listen. William seemed to sense her hesitation. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Emma smiled nervously. "Maybe." William folded his napkin and looked at her with gentle curiosity. "That sounds serious." She laughed softly. "Not serious." Her eyes drifted briefly toward the empty chair, then back to him. The restaurant noise seemed to fade around them. "Can I ask you something?" William followed her gaze. For a second, his expression changed. Not defensively, more like someone preparing to open a door that had remained closed for a long time. "You can ask." Emma took a slow breath. "Who are you still waiting for?" The words landed gently between them. No judgment, no pity, just honesty. William did not answer immediately. He looked toward the chair, then toward the photograph resting beside the untouched water glass. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window beneath the glow of the streetlights. Minutes seemed to stretch. Emma wondered if she had crossed a line. Then William smiled. Not because the question was easy, because nobody had asked it in 3 years. Everyone noticed the chair. Nobody noticed the waiting. He lowered his eyes to the photograph and carefully picked it up. His thumb brushed the edge of the frame with familiar affection. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Emma had ever heard it. Her name was Eleanor. He paused. A faint smile touched his face. And for 32 years, she sat right there. Emma glanced toward the chair. Suddenly it no longer looked empty. It looked occupied by memory, by laughter, by conversations that once filled Friday evenings. William looked through the window at the falling snow, then back at the photograph. "I suppose," he said softly, "this story starts with her." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The restaurant continued around them as though nothing unusual had happened. Plates moved from kitchen to table. Conversations rose and fell. Glasses clinked softly beneath the warm glow of the hanging lights. Yet at table 12, time seemed to slow. William held the photograph carefully in his hands. Emma remained beside the table, not as a waitress waiting to take an order, but as someone being trusted with a memory. William looked down at the picture and smiled. It was the kind of smile that carried both joy and sorrow at the same time. "Eleanor loved Friday nights," he said quietly. "No matter how busy life became, she insisted we have dinner together every Friday." His eyes drifted toward the empty chair. "When I was building my company, I missed birthdays, vacations, anniversaries. I convinced myself it was temporary. I told myself I was doing it for our future." He paused briefly. She never complained. Emma listened without interrupting. William's voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it. Regret. Not sharp regret. The kind that settles into a person after years of reflection. "One day she made me a promise," he continued. "She said that no matter what happened, we would always protect Friday nights." Outside the window, snow continued to fall. White flakes drifted beneath the streetlights like tiny pieces of memory. William watched them for a moment. Eventually, the company succeeded, more than either of us ever imagined. Suddenly, everyone wanted meetings. Investors. Interviews. Awards. A soft laugh escaped him. "The funny thing is that the more successful I became, the more determined Eleanor became about keeping Friday dinners sacred." Emma smiled. "She sounds wise." William nodded. "She was the wisest person I ever knew." The answer came without hesitation, as though he had spoken those words 1,000 times before. He placed the photograph gently beside the second water glass. Emma noticed the image more clearly now. A woman with bright eyes and a warm smile sat across from a younger William at what appeared to be the very same restaurant years earlier. This place was her favorite, William said. Not because of the food. He glanced around the room. Because it felt ordinary. Emma looked puzzled. William smiled again. When your life becomes complicated, ordinary things start feeling precious. The words lingered between them. Emma understood more than he realized. Most people spent their lives chasing extraordinary moments. Yet the memories they treasured most often came from ordinary evenings shared with someone they loved. William folded his hands together and looked once more at the empty chair. 3 years ago, he said softly, Eleanor and I came here for dinner just like we always did. His voice grew quieter. Neither of us knew it would be our last Friday together. He stopped there, not because he wanted to hide the story, because some memories required courage to continue. Emma felt it immediately. The air around the table seemed heavier now, not with sadness alone, but with significance. For 3 years, William had carried this story by himself. Tonight, for the first time, someone was finally listening. William's gaze remained fixed on the snowfall beyond the window. The reflection of the restaurant lights shimmered softly across the glass, blending the present with memories that seemed only a heartbeat away. Emma stood quietly beside the table. She understood that some silences deserved respect. After a long moment, William continued. That evening felt completely ordinary. A faint smile appeared. Eleanor ordered her usual chicken pasta. I complained about answering emails during dinner. She told me to put my phone away. He shook his head gently. She always won that argument. Emma smiled. She could almost picture it. The laughter, the familiar routine, the comfort of two people who knew each other so well that conversation flowed without effort. William glanced at the photograph. People think extraordinary. Moments announce themselves. They think life gives you a warning before everything changes. His fingers rested lightly against the edge of the frame. Most of the time, it does not. The restaurant noise seemed distant now. William's voice carried no bitterness, only truth. We finished dinner. We walked outside. It had started snowing that night, too. He looked toward the street, where fresh snow continued to gather beneath the lamps. Before we got into the car, Eleanor stopped and looked back at this place. A soft laugh escaped him. I asked her what she was doing. She told me she was memorizing the view. Emma felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. William smiled sadly. I told her she was being dramatic. For the first time, his eyes grew slightly brighter with emotion. She told me that one day I would understand why ordinary moments matter. He paused. I did not understand then. Emma looked toward the empty chair. Somehow the space felt fuller with every word. Not occupied by grief. Occupied by a life. A real person. A woman whose presence still shaped the room years later. A few days later, William said quietly, everything changed. He did not offer details. He did not need to. Emma understood that some experiences belong to the heart more than to language. William took a slow breath and looked around the restaurant. Families were still talking. Servers were still moving between tables. Someone near the bar laughed loudly. Life continued exactly as it always had. For months after she was gone, I stopped coming here. His voice remained steady. Then one Friday, I found myself standing outside the door. He smiled faintly. I thought I would stay for 10 minutes. His eyes moved toward the second glass of water. That was 3 years ago. Emma followed his gaze. Suddenly the routine made sense. The second glass. The second dessert. The empty chair. None of it was about refusing reality. It was about holding on to love long enough to survive the loss. William looked at her for the first time in several minutes. Do you know what surprises me most? Emma shook her head. Nobody ever asked about her. There was no accusation in his voice. Only quiet amazement. Hundreds of dinners. Thousands of people. 3 years. His smile softened. You were the first. Emma looked at the photograph again, then at the chair, then back at William. And for the first time, she realized that the story he was telling was not really about losing Eleanor. It was about what happens when someone finally helps another person remember her out loud. The conversation stayed with Emma long after her shift ended. As she drove home through the snow-covered streets, she found herself thinking about Eleanor. Not the photograph, not the story, the person. A woman who had somehow left such a lasting imprint on another human being that 3 years later, an empty chair still carried her presence. The following Friday arrived beneath a clear winter sky. The city seemed brighter after days of snow. Storefront windows reflected sunlight. Holiday decorations lined the streets. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere felt unusually warm. When William entered that evening, Emma noticed something different immediately. The heaviness she had first seen weeks ago had softened. It had not disappeared. Grief rarely worked that way. But there was more ease in his smile now. More openness. More willingness to let another person stand near the memories he had protected for so long. As soon as he sat down, he placed the photograph on the table. Then he surprised Emma by motioning toward it when she approached. "Would you like to see her?" For a moment, Emma simply blinked. It felt like an invitation into something sacred. She stepped closer and looked carefully at the picture. Eleanor's smile seemed to fill the frame. She looked confident, kind, and completely comfortable sitting beside William. "She looks wonderful," Emma said honestly. William's expression brightened. She was. The answer came instantly. Not because he had memorized it. Because he still believed it. They spoke throughout the evening whenever Emma had a free moment. Small conversations. Small memories. Yet each one revealed another piece of Eleanor's character. She loved old jazz records. She collected postcards from places she never planned to visit. She believed every major life decision should be discussed over dinner rather than in an office. She wrote notes inside books and left them where William would find them months later. By the time dessert arrived, Emma felt as though she had almost met her. "She sounds impossible to forget," Emma said. William smiled. That was one of her talents. Then his expression grew thoughtful. He stared quietly at the photograph for several seconds. "The strange thing is that I remember everything about her." Emma listened carefully. "That sounds like a gift." William nodded slowly. "Sometimes it is." He looked toward the empty chair. "Sometimes it keeps you standing still." The words lingered between them. For the first time, Emma sensed something deeper beneath the routine. The dinners were not simply about remembering Eleanor. They were also about avoiding something. Moving forward. Letting go. Accepting that memory and life could exist together. William took a slow breath and folded his hands. "There is something I never told anyone." Emma remained silent. The last conversation we had in this restaurant ended with a promise. His eyes settled on the chair across from him. A promise I have never been able to keep. Outside, evening settled over Chicago. Inside, the restaurant lights glowed warmly against the winter darkness. Emma looked at William and realized the story was changing. Until now, it had been about the woman who was gone. But the promise waiting beneath those memories was still unfinished. And somewhere beyond the empty chair, a different future was quietly waiting to be found. Emma remained beside the table, sensing that the promise mattered more than any business achievement William had ever accomplished. Around them, the restaurant carried on with its familiar rhythm. A family celebrated a birthday near the back wall. Glasses clinked softly. The scent of coffee drifted through the air. Yet at table 12, the evening seemed suspended between memory and possibility. William looked toward the photograph once more before speaking. A few months before Eleanor passed away, she began talking about retirement. He smiled faintly. "Not mine. Hers." Emma listened carefully. "She wanted to travel." William laughed softly. "That was part of it." His eyes brightened as he remembered. She kept a notebook filled with ideas. Places she wanted to see. Things she wanted to learn. Small adventures. He paused. But there was one dream she cared about more than anything else. Emma waited. William folded his hands together. She wanted to create a scholarship program. The answer surprised her. "For students." William nodded. "For young people who worked while attending school." His gaze moved toward Emma's apron. "People like you." The words hung gently between them. William continued. Eleanor believed there were thousands of talented young people carrying responsibilities nobody could see. Working late shifts. Helping their families. Paying tuition one paycheck at a time. He smiled. She said those people deserved someone to believe in them. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. The idea sounded exactly like the woman William had been describing for weeks. Thoughtful. Observant. Focused on others. "We spent months discussing it," William said. "She even chose a name." He looked down briefly. "The Eleanor Carter Future Builders Scholarship." Emma smiled. "That sounds beautiful." William nodded slowly. Then his expression changed. The sadness returned. Not overwhelming. Just honest. "After she was gone, I could not do it." Emma looked surprised. "You could not." William let out a quiet breath. "I told myself I was waiting for the right time." His eyes drifted toward the snow-covered street outside. Then 1 year passed. Then another. Then another. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. Emma finally understood. The empty chair was not only preserving memory. It was preserving unfinished grief. Every Friday, William returned to the same table, the same chair, the same routine, because moving forward felt dangerously close to leaving Eleanor behind. "You still have the scholarship plans?" Emma asked gently. William reached into his leather notebook and removed several folded pages. He handed them across the table. Emma carefully opened them. Inside were handwritten notes, budgets, ideas, draft mission statements. Everything looked complete. Everything except the final signature. She stared at the pages in disbelief. "You finished all of this?" William smiled sadly. 3 years ago. Emma looked from the papers to the photograph, then back to William. "Why have you never started it?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he answered with a level of honesty that seemed to surprise even him. "Because if I finished her dream, I was afraid I would have to accept she was gone." Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly through the darkness. Inside, Emma looked at the scholarship papers spread across the table beside the photograph and the untouched glass of water. Suddenly, the future William had been avoiding sat right in front of him. And for the first time in 3 years, someone else could see it too. The scholarship papers remained on the table long after Emma finished reading them. The handwritten notes carried the weight of years. Not because they were unfinished, but because they were waiting. William sat quietly across from the empty chair while the restaurant moved around them. For the first time since Emma had met him, she could clearly see the crossroads hidden beneath his routine. One path led backward into memory. The other carried Eleanor's dream into the future. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Emma carefully placed the papers back on the table. "Can I tell you something?" William nodded. "Of course." Emma glanced down at her apron before looking back at him. "My mother worked 2 jobs when I was growing up." William listened. She cleaned offices during the day and worked at a grocery store at night. Emma smiled faintly. "She used to leave little notes in my lunchbox." William's expression softened. "What kind of notes?" Emma laughed quietly. "Usually reminders that she believed in me more than I believed in myself." She paused. "We did not have much money." William nodded. "Neither did my family when I was young." The admission surprised her. Emma continued. "College almost did not happen for me." She looked around the restaurant. "I work here because tuition bills do not disappear." William followed her gaze. For the first time, he seemed to view the dining room differently, not as a customer, as Eleanor might have seen it. Young people carrying responsibilities invisible to everyone else. Emma gently touched the scholarship proposal. "Someone like me would have applied." The words settled over the table. Simple, honest, powerful. William looked at the handwritten mission statement Eleanor had created years earlier. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. "That sounds exactly like the person she wanted to help." Emma glanced toward the empty chair. "Then maybe she already knew people like us would eventually find this." William laughed softly. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that had become increasingly rare in recent years. As the evening continued, their conversation shifted from memory to possibility. Emma asked questions about the scholarship. William answered. How many students could it support? More than he could count. How many years had he spent refining the details? Nearly 3. Had the foundation paperwork already been prepared? Yes. Every document was complete. Every plan was ready. Everything except the final decision. Near closing time, Emma stood beside the table holding the dessert plates. The second slice of cheesecake remained untouched, as always. Yet tonight something felt different. The routine no longer seemed frozen. It seemed ready to move. William gathered the scholarship papers and carefully placed them back inside his notebook. Then he looked at the photograph. Eleanor always had a way of making things sound simple. Emma smiled. Maybe some truths are simple. William considered that. Such as, Emma glanced toward the empty chair, then at the notebook, then back at him. Finishing her dream does not mean leaving her behind. The words arrived gently. No pressure, no lecture, just truth. William stared at the notebook for several seconds. Outside, fresh snow covered the sidewalks. Inside, warm light reflected across the windows. Finally, he looked up. There was moisture in his eyes, but his smile remained steady. You know, he said quietly. That sounds exactly like something Eleanor would have said. And for the first time in 3 years, the possibility of keeping his promise felt less frightening than the possibility of never keeping it at all. The week that followed felt different for William. For the first time in years, Friday was not the only day he thought about Eleanor's scholarship. The notebook that had spent 3 years resting untouched inside a drawer now sat open on his desk. Meetings were postponed. Documents were reviewed. Old plans were examined with fresh eyes. Yet none of those changes felt as significant as a simple realization that had quietly taken root after his conversation with Emma. He had spent years preserving a memory. He had spent almost no time continuing its purpose. The following Friday evening arrived beneath a pale winter sunset. The restaurant windows glowed warmly against the cold Chicago air. When William entered, Emma immediately noticed something unusual. He was carrying a different notebook. Thicker, newer, filled with colored tabs marking different sections. As soon as he reached the table, he placed it beside the photograph. Emma smiled as she approached. "That looks important." William laughed softly. "It is causing me a lot of work." She glanced toward the notebook. "That sounds promising." For the first time since she had known him, excitement appeared in his expression. Not dramatic excitement, the quiet kind that belongs to people rediscovering purpose. Throughout dinner, William shared updates. The Scholarship Foundation attorneys had already been contacted. Financial arrangements were nearly complete. University partnerships were being reviewed. Eleanor's plans, once frozen in time, were finally moving forward. Emma listened with genuine happiness. Each detail seemed to lift a little more weight from his shoulders. Yet near the end of the meal, William grew quiet again. He stared toward the empty chair. The familiar sadness returned, though it no longer felt quite as heavy as before. Emma noticed immediately. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. William smiled without looking away from the chair. "The first scholarship recipient." Emma nodded. "What about them?" His eyes settled on the photograph. Eleanor should have been the one meeting them. The honesty in his voice filled the space between them. Emma understood. Progress did not erase grief. Healing did not remove love. Some wishes remained impossible, no matter how much time passed. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Emma looked around the restaurant. Families shared meals. Friends celebrated milestones. Life continued all around them. Finally, she turned back toward William. "Can I tell you what I think?" William nodded. "Please." Emma glanced at the photograph beside the second glass. "I think Eleanor already met them." William looked puzzled. Emma smiled. "Not the person specifically." She pointed toward the notebook. "But every student she dreamed about helping. Every future life she hoped to change. Every opportunity she wanted to create." Her voice remained calm. Those people existed in her heart long before they existed on paper. William listened carefully. Emma continued. "You are not creating her dream." She looked at the scholarship plans. "You are delivering it." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that appears when truth arrives unexpectedly. William looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he smiled. A real smile. Warm, grateful, peaceful. For the first time, the chair across from him no longer seemed like a reminder of what had ended. It felt like a reminder of what could still begin. And as the snow drifted gently beyond the window, William realized he was no longer sitting between the past and the future. He was finally carrying one into the other. Winter slowly gave way to early spring. Snow disappeared from the sidewalks. Trees along the city streets began showing hints of green. And for the first time in 3 years, something else changed as well. The scholarship Eleanor had dreamed about was no longer a collection of papers inside a notebook. It was real. Applications arrived from across the country. Students shared stories about balancing work, education, and family responsibilities. Some worked overnight shifts. Others cared for younger siblings while attending classes. Many of them sounded remarkably similar to the people Eleanor had always wanted to help. Every Friday evening, William continued coming to the restaurant. The table remained the same. The window remained the same. Even the second glass of water still appeared beside the empty chair. Yet the atmosphere had changed. The ritual no longer felt trapped in the past. It felt connected to the future. One Friday in April, William arrived carrying a folder filled with scholarship applications. Emma noticed immediately. "Busy week?" she asked as she greeted him. William smiled. "You have no idea." He opened the folder and gently spread several letters across the table. Emma glanced at them. Handwritten essays, personal stories, dreams, challenges, hopes. William looked almost overwhelmed. "I thought there might be a few dozen applications." He laughed softly. "There are hundreds." Emma smiled. "That sounds like a good problem." William nodded. "Eleanor would have loved this." The words no longer carried the same weight of sadness. There was still longing. There would probably always be longing. But now there was pride too. As dinner continued, William shared some of the applicants' stories. A nursing student working night shifts at a hospital cafeteria. A young man helping support his grandparents while studying engineering. A waitress attending community college between double shifts. Emma listened carefully. Each story seemed to bring Eleanor's vision into sharper focus. Near the end of the evening, William removed a sealed envelope from the folder. He looked at it quietly before placing it beside the photograph. "What is that?" Emma asked. William smiled. "The acceptance letter for the first scholarship recipient." Emma's eyes widened. "Already?" He nodded. "The selection committee finished yesterday." For a moment, neither spoke. The envelope sat beside Eleanor's photograph and the untouched water glass. 3 objects. Past, present, future. Finally, Emma looked at him. "Do you know what I think?" William laughed. "You asked that question right before saying something important." Emma smiled. "Maybe." Her eyes moved toward the envelope. "I think tonight is the first Friday in 3 years that you are exactly where she hoped you would be." William looked down at the table. His gaze settled on the photograph. Then, on the envelope. Then on the empty chair. A long silence followed. Not painful. Not lonely. Peaceful. For years he had believed moving forward meant moving away from Eleanor. Now he understood the opposite was true. The best parts of her life had never been trapped inside memories. They were meant to continue through action, through kindness, through opportunities she would never personally witness but had always imagined. William carefully placed his hand over the acceptance letter. Then he smiled toward the empty chair. Not with sorrow, with gratitude. And for the first time since he had returned to this restaurant 3 years earlier, the chair across from him no longer felt empty at all. 1 year later, the restaurant looked almost exactly the same. The same warm lights reflected against the windows. The same familiar booths lined the walls. The same jazz melodies drifted softly through the evening air. Yet for those who paid attention, something important had changed. Table 12 no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like a place where a story had continued. It was a Friday evening in early spring. Outside, the city glowed beneath a golden sunset. Inside, customers filled the dining room with conversation and laughter. Emma moved between tables with the same blue apron she had worn the day she first noticed the empty chair. Some things remained constant. Kindness was one of them. At exactly 6 o'clock, William Carter entered the restaurant. The hostess greeted him warmly. Several employees waved as he passed. He smiled at each of them before walking toward the familiar table by the window. Emma noticed something immediately. He was carrying a small framed photograph beneath one arm and a thin folder beneath the other. When he sat down, he placed the photograph in its usual position. Eleanor smiled back from the frame exactly as she always had. Then he opened the folder. Emma approached with a smile. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." William laughed. "After a year, I think you can call me William." Emma smiled. "Good evening, William." He nodded toward the folder. "I brought something." Emma glanced down. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Young men and women standing beside university buildings. Graduation ceremonies. Scholarship recipients holding certificates. Families smiling together. Lives moving forward. William carefully spread the photographs across the table. The scholarship supported 72 students this year. Emma's eyes widened. 72. William nodded. "And next year there will be more." He picked up one photograph. A young woman wearing a graduation gown stood between her parents. First person in her family to attend college. Another photograph showed a student studying engineering. Another showed a future teacher. Another showed a young waitress balancing classes and work. Every image represented a life touched by a promise that almost remained unfinished. Emma looked at the collection and smiled. She would be proud. William followed her gaze toward Eleanor's photograph. "I hope so." The answer came softly, peacefully, not from uncertainty, from humility. Dinner arrived. Conversation continued. The evening unfolded much like every Friday before it. Yet one detail quietly stood out. For the first time in 4 years, there was only one glass of water on the table. Emma noticed it halfway through the meal. So did William. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke about it immediately. They did not need to. The moment carried its own meaning. Later, as the restaurant began preparing for closing, William stood to leave. He gathered the scholarship photographs. Then he paused. His hand rested gently against Eleanor's framed picture. "Thank you," he said. Emma smiled. "For what?" William looked around the restaurant, then at the chair across from him, then back at Emma, for seeing something everyone else stopped seeing. Silence followed. Warm, comfortable, complete. William picked up the photograph and headed toward the door. Just before stepping outside, he glanced back one final time. The chair remained where it had always been. Empty, ordinary, quiet. Yet somehow it no longer represented absence. It represented love that had outgrown grief. As William disappeared into the evening light, Emma returned to clearing tables. Another Friday had ended. Another ordinary night in an ordinary restaurant. But somewhere beyond those walls, 72 young people were building futures because one woman had dreamed, one man had remembered, and one waitress had cared enough to ask a simple question. Sometimes the people who change our lives do not arrive with grand speeches or extraordinary plans. Sometimes they simply notice the empty chair that everyone else forgot to see.